And then I'd like to welcome our host and moderator, Karen O'Brien. She's the Executive Director of the Michigan Recycling Coalition. Karen, thank you so much for joining us and walking us through this today. We are very glad to have you. I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Emrad. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here with us today. This project has been a long time in the works, so we're really happy to have you here. I am the Executive Director of the Michigan Recycling Coalition, and I'm invested in, making things work better for us here in the region. So when we talk about market development, we usually think about fostering the use of recycled materials in manufacturing and even in developing new end uses for recycled materials. Wayne Jurdy in Minnesota has been doing this kind of important work for years, but equally important aspects of market development are ensuring that manufacturers have adequate supplies of the recycled materials they want. We've all felt supply chain issue disruptions of late, and it's no different when we think about the reverse supply chain. For recycling, this is where local and regional governments come in. Your job is to provide or at least assure cost-effective recycling opportunities are available to your communities. And it's also about maximizing the recovery of those materials to build economies of scale and efficiencies and to benefit local and regional processors and manufacturers. The public sector has a key role to play in pulling the recyclables out of households and businesses to keep them circulating in the economy. So really, it's both a responsibility and an opportunity for communities. But I know here in Michigan, many communities have not yet stepped up to providing recycling opportunities. We know recycling works. There are proven best practices, and yet many are without adequate services. We also know that it takes a lot to add new or enhance existing programs. So we're here today to provide some tools and some perspective about stepping up and into best practices and integrated services. We hope to strengthen program development efforts to move from disposal-based practices to more productive and sustainable materials management in communities. Next slide, please. So the effort to support local governments in making the case for recycling really started several years ago in EPA Region 4. Region 4 states convened once a year, and what rose to the top was a recognition that technical assistance was really needed to help locals advocate for programming, but also that there's a need to support private market development and that nonprofits like mine and yours in your state are a part of the solution. So over the course of 3 years, Region 4 and RRS worked to facilitate the work with CERDIC and each state, and it resulted in the development of this Making the Case for Recycling curriculum. Local governments in the region were taught how to use these customized tools that reflected state and regional conditions. And ultimately, that work is the foundation for this Region 5 project. Next slide. When I was on the National Recycling Coalition Board of Directors, market development was a priority. And you may remember that the NRC hosted an EPA-supported a market development workshop in Chicago before the pandemic. Well, the collective discussion and work around this topic here led us back to the importance of a well-rounded market development effort and the fact that we all here benefit from strong regional markets and the programs that deliver feedstock to them. So in conversation with EPA headquarters, the MRC and RRX really explored adapting these tools to Region 5 for the purposes of strengthening local markets by identifying differences in programming and supporting investment with good financial information. So with a EPA Region 5 grant, the tools were adapted and an organics module was added to the toolkit. All of this work took place in the lean times when funding wasn't available. But now, as we are seeing renewed interest and investment at the federal level, and in Michigan and other states are starting to take note. We are readying ourselves to benefit from this interest and from funding. And we already have, because of this work we've done over the past few years together, we already have a structure within which to support this developing regional work that we'd like to do together. So next slide. So the Integrated Solid Waste Management Toolkit is comprehensive, involving waste prevention, recycling, composting, disposal, inputs and outputs. And the goal of the ISM toolkit is really to train people to advocate and ultimately adopt new or expand existing recycling programs in an integrated system through the directional guidance of this training and these tools. It is especially geared to support smaller and underserviced communities that need to step into their role in integrated service provision. Excuse me just a second while I make sure I'm on the right slide. The toolkit consists of the funding and accounting handbook, which you'll hear about, the ISWM model, an interactive Excel-based directional tool that kind of guides municipality to appropriate service options. And making the case is really about bringing engagement around kind of the value chain and the system to implement services. Again, we know recycling works. We have proven best practices, and yet we have many that are without services or have limited services, or there are just poor performing programs. So using the tools and through this discussion, we hope to support program developers to complete the system transition from waste disposal based systems to more integrative service provision systems that include recycling and organics. Next slide. So before we get to today's agenda, we want to facilitate ongoing sharing around existing and developing community resources, funding opportunities, contract and ordinance templates, partnerships, whatever is helpful to all of us. This will help us understand where you are and what we may need to bring to the table to support you, but it also provides you with access to all of these resources. I'll share at this time that the National Recycling Coalition has a resource library that also might be helpful to you. So be sure to, to take advantage of what national organizations are making available. So all of these resources will be so important and helpful to you as you make the case for recycling in your own communities. Isabel will put the link to a Google Sheet in the chat. In this Google Sheet, we ask you to, put whatever you think may be helpful to the group. Use only one row and separate different resources with a comma. Be sure to enter your state, all that kind of stuff. And we will also populate this sheet with resources we want to make sure you are aware of. So do keep this link with you. And next slide. That really takes us to what we're about today. Marty Seaman will talk about the accounting handbook and walk you through that. Chris King and Holly Hallowell will walk through the spreadsheet tools for recycling and organics. Marty will talk about making the case for recycling and how you do that in your community. We'll talk to an elected official about his perspective as to how to make the case, how to rise above the fray, and then we'll wrap up conversations here. So without further ado, next slide. Marty Seaman is Principal and Executive Vice President at RRS, and we welcome him here to talk to you about the handbook today. Thanks, Marty.
Thank you. And good afternoon, good morning for those of you further west, but it's really a pleasure to see you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Principal and Executive Vice President at RRS. I've got about 19 years as a practitioner and now about 16 years as a consultant. And so, as you know, over the years, I've had the chance many times to make the case for recycling. So I'm really really pleased to be here today to talk about this project. I really want to thank each of you for the time that you're spending today, and really encourage you to continue to reach out to anyone on the RS team or on this team about any ways to make the project better and make these tools better. And Karen, you especially, a really great description about what's in front of us and what these tools represent. About the accounting handbook, I'll be talking again later about some of these pieces, but it's worth understanding the difference between these first two tools and what the intention of using them really is. And so understand first and foremost that unlike the fun plug and play and all the different things you can do with Chris here in a minute, this really is a static book, but it really drills home on the notion that to really make the case for recycling, and especially to make the business case for recycling, which is so much of what was driving this, is that you really have to be competent in all areas of financial planning, because it's just a foundational piece for everything you do. And so, the handbook tries to make this relatively easy, both by identifying costs, allowing a planning process to occur, and to use this for that. But it's more important as it gets through looking into hidden costs and looking for ways to compare ISWM services to other types of services. And again, it's valuable in helping to understand internal funding and departmental funding. And so in that sense, it really also helps to explain cost to the public. And so that is an important piece, but it also is really a launching pad to think about the ways we can move outside of our internal operation and start to work across the value chain. Literally what's inside the accounting handbook, and this is something that you can link to and that folks should already have access to. These are the headings that are within there, but again, important ones: ways to fund solid waste management, and in particular, looking at enterprise funds as a way to really think about the recycling system and that system as a whole system, the ISWM as a whole system. Talking also about full cost accounting, which again is a way both to cover costs, but also to think about all the benefits that accrue to your programming. And some of this accounting terminology, being able to make sure that what you're doing is going to be recognized within, typical standards. All of this is very important to understanding that to make the case for recycling, we have to fundamentally and foundationally be really good at making the business case for that. So also within the guidebook, there's a number of kind of ready to use forms and some of these pieces. Our expectation is that you're going to need to do this locally. You're going to need to do this in a really disciplined way around a regional approach or around your own approach that is really based on local numbers and vetting that process. But Melissa, if you want to head to the next couple of ones, you'll see there's a number of spreadsheets within the system that are designed to help understand those costs and to focus on them. And you'll see these get played out in a minute on some of the spreadsheet items as well, and some of the directional tools as well. And so they have, again, a lot of utility. If you don't have these tools, there's a lot of these tools available in other places. But I really would recommend you be able to really talk strong within your own organization about what the financial impacts of every element of your program are, and hopefully this tool will help you to do that. And go ahead, next slide. And so again, the one element I want to really emphasize here is around full cost accounting and this process of identifying all direct and indirect costs and revenues. This is a really important one. It allows you to do the internal piece of being able to argue within departments or within a municipality or within an organization about what's the right level of investment to make those cases. But it also, these become the places where you can think about revenue, you can think about benefits, you can think about collaboration, and make sure that you're capturing all those things so that you can really make the strongest possible business case. Next slide. And so I'll leave it at that, and we'll get to the fun stuff with the directional tool, but happy to entertain questions at this time, Karen, or as you see fit.
Are there any questions from I don't think there's any in that, but at this point, I would let you know that as you have questions in the presentation, feel free to put those in the chat and we'll respond to those maybe after each speaker. The slides will definitely be available after, as will the recording of the event. So thanks for that question. And Marty, why don't we go ahead and move on to the next speaker, and we'll keep track of the questions in the chat.
That's perfect. And also right now there is a link, right, for folks that they can pull either this directional spreadsheet or the accounting sheet handbook right now, right?
That's correct. We can provide those links in the chat. It is available on the Michigan Recycling Coalition's webpage and the resource, the RRS webpage. So we'll put those in the chat as well.
Super, thank you.
Hi, yeah, so I'll take it from here, and I'll talk about, my name is Chris King, and I'm a senior engineer with RS, and I'll be talking about the directional spreadsheet tool and how that kind of integrates into what we're trying to do here. So this is really a decision-making support tool. I would highlight that the numbers are all ballpark, and the way you're looking at it is really directional rather than direct costs. And this is really designed for local governments, and it compares the costs and impacts of various solid waste management program choices. So there's several choices within the model that we can look at and compare. Next slide, please. So the questions then, and this is kind of a preview of when we get into the model, but the questions that are kind of asked are going to be like, what state are you in? How many households are represented in the program, and things like that. And those will really pre-populate in the back end with this information, some of this default information to generate the results. And then there's also some places with landfill tip fee and processing fees that those can be directly entered in to really adapt the model to the specific program. If you want to go to the next slide. So the first portion of this, we're looking at collection and recycling collection. And there's really 7 different kind of scenarios that we're looking in, from a comprehensive drop-off program all the way through a single stream with carts and weekly collection. And so we have both every other week collection and weekly collection and various different collection methods. If you go to the next slide. We also have an organics portion of this, and the organics looks at 4 different scenarios. We look at weekly yard waste, weekly yard and food waste, and then 2 different types of processing systems, aerated static pile and a windrow system. Next slide. And the final component of this is this hub and spoke and processing scenarios that we're going to look at. And that goes all the way from direct haul to transfer to looking at actually building a Murph, bringing in regional partners. What does that take? How many households do we need to serve before we start thinking about actually developing and building our own facility? If you go to the next one. And this is just a quick thing to kind of bracket the way the model works a little bit. So community size breakdown, if we look at smaller communities, some of the limitations of the model is you're only going to have really 1 truck and maybe only looking at drop off. It's hard to really justify savings for every other week and weekly collection because they're essentially the same based on the infrastructure. And then we get into medium communities, and now we're looking at multiple collection trucks, multiple drop-offs. There's definitely savings when you start to look at every other week collection if that's a service level option that you wanted to look at. And then once we get into larger communities above 50,000 households, it starts to look at, well, what does a regional Murph look like? Could we be a hub and have the region kind of bring in material to our processing facility? And that's when that starts to make sense. Next slide. So we're going to do a tool walkthrough. And I have 3 examples that I'm going to share. And then my colleague, Holly, she's going to do another couple examples specifically around organics. Let me see. I think everyone can see my screen. Just get this out of the way. Perfect. So example 1 is going to be a municipality that has no program and wants to start one, either drops off or curbside. And in that kind of avenue, I'm going to use a lot of the defaults in the model. So I'm not going to kind of enter in any of the specific information. I'm just going to use kind of the defaults of the model, and we'll go through kind of these inputs. So the first thing is the community name. That's pretty simple. The next is we have a drop-down list for the state. In this case, in the example, I'm using Ohio. You enter in the number of households served by the program. And then we have the estimated level of participation. This is a drop down, and it's really essentially the program's offered to everyone, but what percentage of people are actually going to take advantage of it and use it. Again, like I said, I'm going to use default, so I use a medium participation, but it goes all the way from high to low. Next thing is the community type, and this goes from urban to rural. I've selected for this example rural suburban. And this is really just the density of the households, and how kind of efficient you can be with collections. So if more rural, you can't pick up as many households. Urban environments, you can pick up more households in a shorter amount of time. The next thing is, will glass be included in the single stream recycling? By default, this is yes, but if your program wasn't going to use glass or going to collect glass in a different avenue, you could select no as well. The next question is, how much do you think people in your community recycle? So how good of recyclers are your community? And this goes all the way from a high to a low. High is really for advanced programs or pay-as-you-throw programs. Medium are kind of really fully developed programs. Medium low is default, and then low would be like a brand new program, really unfamiliar with it. Question 8 is, do you know your landfill tip fee? Like I said, this is a new program. Municipalities just thinking about it or looking at it first cut. So they've selected the default. In kind of as we get further on in some of these examples, we'll turn that to yes, and we'll input actual landfill tip fees. But if you select no, the model automatically populates a landfill tip fee for your state. And then do you know the net recycling processing fee? So the net recycling processing fee in this case is going to be any revenue that you would get from the recycling minus any processing fees that you would pay. And again, as we get further on into the model, we'll start playing with that a little bit. But as of now, in this first example, we're just going to use the default, which is populated automatically. Question 10 is, how far is your municipality from a transfer station or Murph? If you were going to direct haul it, so direct haul being that you're using the same trucks that collect the material to haul it to either the Murph or the transfer station. By default, this is 15 miles one way. And then the next thing is, do you know the distance of material recovery facility if you were going to build a transfer station? So essentially, how far away would your municipality be from the transfer station? Again, we'll just use it default now, which sets that at a default of 75 miles away. Questions 12 through 15. These are related to organics. I'm just going to leave them default. In my portion, I'm really focusing on the recycling portion, but I'm sure Holly will adjust these during her part of it. Similar to the recycling, it has level of participation. How well do you think your community will participate in organics? What's the fee at your processor? And then how far away are you from your processor? So I've left those all default. And now we'll go to the first kind of results tab, which is collection. And really kind of to hammer this home, these are really ballpark numbers. These are directional tools. So this is not like exactly the cost that would plug into an accounting form or anything like that. These are really just to kind of get your in the area. And another thing that you would want to look at when you're using this tool is really when you're going through these different service levels, you want to really have your kind of it align with your program and community goals. So that comes into that decision making. There's not only how much is it going to cost and what do you think is the right service level based on the cost that you think your residents are willing to pay, but also does this align with your goals, your solid waste goals, your diversion goals, and how does this integrate in with that? So I'm going to take a look at a few different sections here. First one is the tons of recycling per year. So this is an estimated tons of recycling per year. And as you can see, as the service level and frequency increases, that those number of tons increases as well. Also want to look here at annual costs. So annual cost is just that annual amount of cost that is expected to be paid by the municipality. The other way to look at that is number 5 here, which is on a per household basis. So sometimes looking at this on a per household basis makes more sense than actually just looking at it as the lump and the total. And then part 6 here is the cost per ton recycled. This is a great way to think about recycling, because as you'll notice, some of the more expensive options in the actual dollar amount end up returning a better cost per ton recycled, because you end up increasing the amount of tons that you're going through that more expensive system a little bit more efficiently than some of the lower cost options. The next thing that we'll look at here is capital costs. So this is just a thing to kind of understand what that capital outlay looks like. Is it going to be $500,000? Is it going to be $4 million? What are some ballpark numbers for implementing some of these programs? And then the last thing I'll just highlight here is staffing. So this is just a simplified kind of staffing to the model, and it just shows the municipality, okay, how much additional staff will we need to do this? How much, how many additional people are we going to have to bring on to provide this service? So those are some of the main kind of sections here in the collection that are good for kind of comparing. Let's just say in this scenario, the municipality that we're in this example looks at this and says the recycling drop-off program is in line with their goals and their kind of budget and what they want to spend. So they would go to the next section and look at the hub and spoke, or the processing part of this. So just to highlight, this first section is all collection. And then the next section is really the processing of that. So you've collected the material, now you have to take it somewhere to process it, or have paid somebody to process it. What we do is we select the selected service options. So like I said, it's a recycling drop-off that gets selected. And then a couple of things come out. Really, the two big ones are essentially that this community doesn't generate enough material to even really consider processing it on their own. So they have to transfer it or direct haul it to get it somewhere. If we compare the transfer and the direct haul is much cheaper in this case than building the transfer station, which is essentially 3 times the cost. So the transfer station at this time doesn't really make sense for them. They're better off direct hauling with their drop-off system to a processor. And then that's essentially the costs here. This includes that processing cost and any additional hauling costs that would be associated with that. And that's their result. So you really combine these two numbers, the selected kind of processing route and the selected collection route, and that gives you kind of your total costs that you're looking at for that implementing that whole system. Let me just make sure I talked about everything. Oh, let me just go into this these lines. So on this sheet, we have the cost per ton, including revenue. So this is that, again, if you're looking at that, a cost per ton, there's also a cost per household. And then we have the annual costs, which are capital and operating. And then we also have the capital costs broken out. So again, you can look at those. How much is that operating? How much is it going to cost me per year? Or what's that capital outlay actually look like? So now I'm going to go to example 2. Let me pull this up. So example 2 is a program that already has a drop-off. So they have some experience with recycling, but they're hoping to maybe transition to a curbside collection route. I've just selected Illinois here as the state. I'm looking at a community with 50,000 households. A lot of this has been selected as default, but because this is this program kind of knows what's going on, they likely have quick access to this information. So I've filled in the landfill tip fee, which in this case is $55 a ton. I've also added in the recycling processor gate fee. So this municipality likely already has a relationship with a processing facility or processor, and they know kind of the economics of that. The way that I'm entering this in, just to make it simple for myself, I'm doing it just the way it has here. So I'm saying they're going to get $60 a ton for recycling back in revenue, and then the processor charges them $100 a ton for processing. So that's a net cost of $40 a ton. I also have in here, I'm adjusting the distances that the municipality is going to be either direct hauling or transferring. And I've selected 80 miles. So again, like I said, they probably already know this. They have this drop-off program. They know where their material's going. They know how far away it is. They input those to make the model more specific to their situation. So next we'll go to the collection model. Again, ballpark directional, and it needs to align with those goals. This municipality looks at these goals. They look at, say, okay, this is kind of where we're paying for drop off, and here's our options as we go down the row here, down the column, excuse me, the pricing and what that looks like. And they've made a decision that, okay, for them, single stream every other week collection makes sense for us. We're willing to look at that kind of that total cost. The capital cost is within the range of something that we're interested in. And it also has the added benefit of when we go to that, where our per ton recycled cost has actually gone down. So we're getting more recycling, but we're paying less per ton for it. So that's a benefit, and that's something they want to look into. So then we take that information. They've selected single stream carts every other week. So like I say, on the drop down here, that's what I select. And this actually, so now we're starting to look at processing. So if they were to do a direct haul, it's a similar cost to actually building the transfer station. So this is an example where likely they didn't have a transfer station before when they were doing a drop off, but now they're at a volume and at a distance that potentially building a transfer station starts to make sense. And just to show that, like if I go here and I go to the recycling drop off, which is what they had before, as you can see, these costs are significantly more for doing the transfer station than it was for the direct haul when they were looking at the drop off center. As I go to this now, expanding into this single stream carts every other week collection, those costs become to tip more towards, let's look at building a transfer station and what that all entails. So that's scenario number 2. And we'll go to a third scenario here. And scenario number 3 is, this is like a regional, a large population example. And this is somebody who's looking at potentially developing a Murph, and when does that start to become ideal? How many other community or how many other households do we need to bring in? What do the economics of that look like? So for this example, I'm using Michigan. I do the same 50,000 households. The costs, like I said, they probably know what these are. So I've added in the landfill tip fee for $45 a ton. The revenue, again, I've done the same thing. So they get $50 in revenue. They get charged $110 in processing. That's net $60 they have to pay per ton for processing. And that's their current processing costs. And then I also look at how far away they are from that processing option. And in this scenario, I've selected 70 miles. So 70 miles to look at direct haul and 70 miles for transfer. So the first thing, I'll just go quickly to the thing. Assuming that they've already looked at this sheet and they want to extract as much material as possible, they're going to select single stream carts with weekly collection. That's the highest amount of material that they can essentially process. And that allows them to start thinking about, what's that maximum amount? How much material do we need to be able to collect to actually make this start to look feasible? So I select here single stream carts weekly collection. As you can see, it becomes not feasible. So at 50,000 households, this community, the way that they're structured, it doesn't appear to be feasible. But let's say that instead of just looking at their 50,000 households, they say, okay, regionally, there's another 40,000 households. So we could be this hub, and then the other communities could bring that material to our hub, to our processing facility. And in our region, there's another 40,000 households. So I put in another 40,000, bringing it up to 90,000 total. Now I look at that exact same scenario. We've essentially crossed over that threshold to start looking at processing. So with this regional hub, now I'm starting to think about processing. It becomes a less expensive option that I'm looking at for our region to transfer it, that 70 miles, to that other processor. And then it also shows me that essentially there's this $20 difference, and that if I go back to my input, and let's say I'm able to find a processor that'll give me $20 more per ton or charge me $20 less. Sorry, so make that 70 instead of 50. Then I can look here, and that shows me kind of that break-even cost of when that developing that infrastructure and building that Murph, when that starts to make sense, when that starts to not make sense. So essentially, if I'm able to get a processor who has a better deal than I'm currently able to get because I'm going to be bringing them more tons, then maybe really building the facility doesn't make sense. Or there's other reasons why you would want to build the facility, as far as like, you know, kind of controlling your program and understanding those differences. But this shows you kind of that break-even point of like what that cost has to be for you to start thinking about that. And in this case, it happens to be $40 a ton. And that's the last example I have. So now I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and my colleague Holly will share her screen and talk about organics.
Hi, everyone. Just a second, let me get my screen up here. Okay. Can someone confirm that they see my screen?
Yes, yeah, I can see it.
Okay, great. So my name is Holly Hollowell. I've been with RS for a few years, and I'm a consulting engineer, and I worked on putting together the organics portion of this model. So unlike the traditional recyclables model, this is the first version of the organics model. And so it doesn't have all the same capabilities. There is not the drop-off option for organics or an option for transferring organics. Right now, it allows you to look at two different technologies of composting, so aerated static pile, as well as windrow composting. And it also allows for you to decide whether or not you want to process only yard waste or yard waste and food waste. And so I have an example up here right now. So this is a 30,000 household community. I filled out the recycling section just because, but you still, even to do the organics portion, there are some of the questions up here that you do need to fill out, such as household, of course, you know, the community type, things like that. But down here, these specific questions for organics, you know, it asks you for the level of participation. So how many people are going to be participating, you think, and then how much of those people that are participating, how much are they going to put in their bin? And there's a default value that's based on regional data. So the default value is used here if you don't know what the fee would be. And then also, you know, how far is it to the compost site generally from where you're picking up? And so this first tab is looking at collection. You know, it's pretty similar to what Chris already discussed. And you can see for the different scenarios here for yard waste, so these two are yard waste, but different compost systems, you would get probably this much material on an annual basis. And then when you add food waste, we're assuming that we're going to get more material, so the number increases. And then, you know, broken out by household, of course. And you can also see the number of staff members you might need to collect all this material, as well as capital costs. And the next tab that's valuable is the hub and spoke model, but it's mostly just a hub. There's not really a spoke because there's no transferring. And this is a little bit more difficult to compare different scenarios because you have to use this drop down here to look at the different options. But starting with weekly yard waste collection, So it's weekly, but it's seasonal as well. So that's another thing to consider, because typically organics programs, they're not all year round. So this one accounts for an 8 months out of the year collection, but it is weekly. So weekly yard waste ASP system, this is the amount of tons you would expect to divert within a year. And looking at the cost per ton, it's about 72. And these are just rough numbers, of course. And it has it broken out by household. And you can see that between collecting just yard waste, and then if we were to include food waste, the number changes a little bit, because you get more bang for your buck when you're processing more material, with everything else pretty much staying the same. And this is for like a 30,000 household community. And if we were to look at the changes going to a larger community, so say 65,000, we can see how the prices change. So here we're down to about $42 a ton for processing. And you see that the cost per household decreased by a couple dollars. And this is also rounded here to the nearest dollar. So if you see that the number doesn't change, it might be it changed by 50 cents and it just didn't round the right way. So this can be used as a way to compare, if we were reaching into like 65,000 households, how much cheaper would this be? Like, is it feasible? The other thing that I want to show you guys is the effect on the effect of participation on cost. So right now we're looking at weekly yard waste with an ASP system, and the cost per ton including revenue is 42. So if I were to go back to the input tab, right now I have it set the level of participation to medium. Let's say it goes up to high. So everyone's really into recycling and they do a good job of it. It drops by quite a bit, about $10 per ton for processing. And so you can kind of get an idea of, based on people's willingness to recycle organics, is this going to be a flop or not? And there are some other things too you can change. We also have how much do you think people will recycle? So there are a couple different levers that you can mess around with. And of course, you can look at how that compares when you include food waste. And it doesn't really change too much in this situation, but a windrow system, it is different than ASP. And there's a lot more to deciding whether or not you want windrow or you want ASP. There are lots of different ways to have compost models, but this model, it accounts for a well-staffed compost site, and you have all of the necessary capital investments to properly manage and process organics. I'm sure a lot of you are aware that there are smaller compost operations, and maybe when they need to chip material, they lease something. This model doesn't account for that. It's meant for larger to medium-sized communities processing organics. And that's all I've got. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I think we're going to do questions now.
Just clarification, Marty, do you want to do your presentation, or should we answer these questions quick first?
It seemed like there was a number of them that were going to clarifications specific to the tool, and so I'd say let's answer all those questions while we've got Chris and Holly here.
That's great. Okay, thank you. So thank you for the questions, folks. Chris, I believe, or Holly, because I think we have this question for both recycling and organics, but can you identify the approximate percentage of participation you used for identifying low, medium participation?
Yeah. Let me just 1 second real quick. So yes, let me pull it up. So for high participation is around 70%. Medium high participation is 65%. Medium participation is around 60%, and medium low is around 50%, and low participation is around 40%.
And that is true for organics as well?
Organics is slightly different. It has let me just verify here. It has a slightly lower participation. So high is, rather than being 70, is 65. Medium, high is 60 rather than 65. So it seems to be about 50 or 5% lower participation for organics.
That's great. Okay. We have some other questions for you, Chris. Is there a way that you can estimate the cost specific only to transportation?
Yes. So what you would do is you would essentially put a 0 in for your processing fee, and then it will only calculate transportation costs. So it removes the processing fee. Yep.
Excellent, excellent. This is showing the cost for a community collecting and transporting their own material rather than contracting with a hauler.
Correct. Yep. This is all the program itself is doing the cost. You know, we could talk to some things, but essentially, right, the difference would be the profit margin for a hauler, rather than just the direct cost. So essentially, you would add profit of 20 or 30%, something like that. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, that's interesting. And so, what is the current rate of municipal-owned haulers compared to private haulers? And I think this is a difficult question because it's very specific, kind of region to region, state to state. But do you have anything to add?
I don't have those numbers off the top of my head. We could certainly do some research and find out, but I do not know. Yeah.
You know, and this person is also asking, does the federal government plan to provide grants to support the capital investment needed to create and increase municipal-owned models? I think that remains to be seen, but I would say that there definitely is a need for municipalities to step into service provision of all types, and that funding, at least in Michigan, is available, could be available federally to support capital investment. You know, operating costs do have to be covered. Service costs do have to be covered by the provision of those services. So, you know, a fee for services. And then we have another question here. Does anybody want to respond to that?
Karen, I'll just say that we're certainly going to talk about a number of those elements as we talk about moving from this kind of, you know, financial make the business case to what does it really take to get programs implemented. And we're going to try to brush on a number of those items. And that's certainly a forum. Those are a lot of great questions, but we'll address those as we talk more about the whole value chain.
Okay, great. Thanks, Marty. And it looks like we have, you know, one more question, maybe another coming in. How does the community type affect the model's results?
Yeah. So the main way that it does really is the collection. So essentially, the number of households that you can pick up in a route are changed depending on whether you go from rural to urban. So in urban, you have your highest density. The truck can pick up more households on a route, and in a rural setting, there's less households are picked up per route. So essentially, your costs go up. You need more trucks. You need more drivers as your community becomes more rural for the same population.
That's great. And Chris, I was really intrigued with the fact that you can use this model to go to both identify, you know, where a community sits in context to other communities in a region, and that you can, you know, enlarge that community to identify kind of regional needs and opportunities. Is there anything you want to add about how people can use the model in that way to identify for themselves how they fit into the larger system?
Yeah, I think I think there's like a nuance thing to it. Really, what it comes into, I think, as you identified, larger communities that are close to thinking about their own processing, are really situated to look at their partners regionally and around them. And you can actually do some of the modeling for like, okay, I have a regional partner who's 50 miles away, and if they had to transfer it or they had to do it, and our tipping fee was this. So you can do some of those kind of looking at not only kind of from the main hub, but also as one of these spokes or one of these smaller communities. And you can do all of that within the model by kind of selecting or doing research in your region and look at those for all of those communities involved, rather than just kind of focused on your community and then that potential kind of waste shed.
That's great. I think that's really an effective use of this toolkit, and by state and regional operators, or deciders, decision makers. Okay, great. We do have another question that just came in. Do you get more material per household for rural areas, or is the need for more trucks related more to the miles traveled and time between service stops?
Yeah, it's the latter. So it's the miles traveled and the number between. So the participation, or the how well people recycle, stays relatively similar across those, the rural and suburban. Yeah.
Yep, that's great. Okay, great. Any more questions before we move on? There will be another opportunity later in the game to ask some more questions, but thanks for this. Marty is back to tell us a little bit more about how we actually make the case for recycling. Thanks, Marty.
Yeah, thank you. And really thanks, Chris and Holly. I hope people can appreciate, how that tool can help them. It's very interesting insights that they can make with that, and hopefully they can appreciate that. Also, I hope that highlighted, some of those elements of the budget that I was pointing to earlier, and some of those spreadsheets around capital and staff and how you revenue lines and how you affect some of those. So really useful in all those ways. And in fact, we're going to talk here in a minute about ways that those intersections happen and across the whole value chain, because again, a significant part of our belief of this program is that, as Karen said very well, there are proven practices, there are elements of the programs that are essential, and if you implement best practices around those, you will get high results. These are proven things, and the issue really is around how can we use all these tools to make sure that we're actually implementing these programs. The other piece or other thing I want to stress here is that we're talking a lot about making the case and developing a cohort of people who really can advocate across this whole value chain for solid community-based programs. And we need to make sure that we understand that can be anybody. It might be the state recycling person. It might be that person that's designated to do that, but it might be someone from a utility or from a brand or from a small community that likewise becomes that person that really helps to develop these programs. So this is really something that we can all share, and we really need to have advocates from every element of the value chain to really make it go. So let's go to the next slide. Since it's a circle of a value chain, the great thing is I can start where I want. So I'm purposely starting at number 6 instead of number 1, because there's some really important things I think that we need to understand around this. Let's get to some of the questions that were raised a minute ago, especially for the group that this is targeted for. That small to medium-sized community, that underserved community. There really is a private sector primacy if we think about most of these services, and especially the choices around capital, landfilling, collection, all of the secondary processing that happens, all of those elements, most of those are private sector. The other truth is that there's a significant amount of public sector funding when it comes to the actual capital and the revenues that sustain the capital for many ISWM services. So many communities have their processing center or have their recycling programs because the public sector is paying for them, and they might not be capitalizing them or operating them, but they definitely are a legitimate fund for at least some big portion of what they do. In other areas, they don't fund it. They are funded very rarely in terms of end markets or some other pieces. So it's really important that we just have that lens as we go through and understand if we're going to advocate for this, we have to understand how important private funding is. And there really is a bias in these tools. I think that came up a little bit in some of the questioning. This was designed to help communities, but there's also a recognition that beyond the tools, we have to work across all of these areas if we actually want really successful community-based programs. So, so I wanted to kind of really emphasize that as we look forward to other things, right? So the other piece that I want to raise right now is, interesting enough, when we were about ready to launch this a number of years ago, it was right when the green sword hit, right? And so we were, the green fence hit, right? So we're kind of, here we go. And so now we're in a really dynamic, unique opportunity where there's never been so many funding opportunities, and whether that's federal funding or locals, or an emphasis on climate or other things, or it's the very significant amount of private funding that's looking into sustainability funding and making sure their products are managed appropriately. So it's a very kind of unique time. And so, kind of what does that mean for making the case? It really means that we have to understand those relationships, but we have to be a really strong purchaser as a municipality. We have to be a really strong partner, which means understanding what our various partners across the supply chain need, and it's going to be different than what municipalities and public sector folks do. And so being good at that and developing a way to talk across that is going to be important. It's not about turning everyone into a recycler. It's about understanding what everybody's needs are across the value chain and somehow finding alignment around a program that really can work. And so this is so important that we want to talk about it first. The other piece I want to raise here is that, and Karen talked about this earlier, is that throughout this is being driven by the economic development opportunities for communities, for jobs, for supplying the production in the region. And so it's really important that we understand those folks, and as opposed to operating on our own out here in the recycling world, we really need to integrate into the full economic development infrastructure. So if we could go to the next one. So here, just a couple of basic things. Yes, in the collection space, there's very key roles that folks play in terms of contracting for performance and incentives, things like contamination, education, customer service, et cetera. We expect folks to be good at that, but there's a real challenge, especially in some of our smaller communities and underserved communities, around things like subscription and around issues around franchising. What many folks are driven by, this is kind of this question earlier, they're having to buy services, but in some unique ways, all the way through some cities and other places where franchising and other pieces are maybe an element or could be considered. I think here again, and this really was driven home by some of Chris and Holly's work, the cost of collection as just an overwhelming cost for everybody, the capital that goes into it, and the importance and innovation around this are also kind of things that we have to consider going through this as we develop our contracts, but also recognize the opportunities that are there around. Drop-offs might be a part of the solution. Offering a range of services are a part of that, and certainly providing services into multifamily and into small businesses. That might upset the apple cart in terms of how cities have always doled up the work, but it certainly is driven by economic imperative that says this is a way that we can all participate in these services, lower the cost, get more tons, et cetera. So there's a lot of opportunities here, but it's always going to be important to communities. And it's also always going to be important because if we're going to operate that service, what is that head count, et cetera. And so these are issues that are not really recycling related, but are going to always play big in the minds of decision makers. If we want to make the case around that, we have to appreciate that, understand that, find an intelligent way to talk about that. Next slide. Here again, kind of some of the same concerns around that value chain. Some of this is done by privates, some of this is done by public. For many communities, drop-offs, maybe that's the transition from them operating it to a private operating it. But it's a lot of the same. We know that there's basic best practices around contracting, contamination, education, other revenue share, length of term. There's ways to address these important issues, but I think the question that folks really have to wrestle with, and again, Chris, is that model helped to show that where do these various communities sit in how much value is added? Are we transferring? Are we direct hauling? Are we, where do we sit in that? Because it's going to drive so much of what's required. If we want to be a big value added, how do we get that done? And how do we play in that space? So there's, I think, a real interest, again, the same issues around how much it costs, how much capital is required, almost always requires, kind of communication and collaboration. And there's real issues around innovation as these packages evolve, as the services evolve. This is a really significant capital cost. So how do you address that? But again, the good news here is that these are also the really significant areas around hiring, around economic development, on ways to engage other community partners, on ways to get other folks to invest in this. So the tools that we have are very much public sector slated. They don't allow, or they don't currently say, here's all the other ways you can fund it. But that accounting handbook allows you to say, there's a lot of other ways we can get investors in our facilities, that we can look at value add, or by engaging other partners. Maybe we just benefit from the fact that a secondary processor or someone else is going to come to town because our community is well situated for that, even if our recycling program is just nascent. So there's a lot of opportunities around here, and it's worth understanding what's driving these businesses and really thinking about it in that way. But again, the opportunity is really huge here for economic development. Next slide. When it comes to end markets, I think this is a place where the Region 4, Region 5, connection was very easy, in the sense that we're very fortunate to have a lot of markets in both regions, to have folks who are clamoring for material and could consume all the material that we could deliver and could buy from closer in and less far away, et cetera, to do that. And so while continuing to improve those markets is really important, it's amazing that we have that, and that puts us in a unique position to think about how it is that we're going to go forward and how we continue to support those markets. And again, this is where I think we have to think outside of ourselves in terms of tax, regulatory, other investment supports, just for those very important mills, just for all those very important secondary processors that might need to join up and to be a part of a solution going forward. So I think this also is a place where we're going to look at how do you make investments along the whole value chain. How do we work as a region together on some of these items, because these are certainly bigger than a small community or bigger than a small, than a region. But there are ways to think about. We have partners who are investing in new end markets so that we can include those in. Are we being good partners and good managers when we're finding ways to add materials? There's a lot of talk about lists of acceptable materials, and we should be like Region 4 in a position to say, there's a lot of materials that we can recover. Are we completing the system all the way through? Because there's a lot of great end markets, and there's a lot of great investment being done by a lot of the states in the end markets. So great opportunities there. Next slide. Education engagement. This one, again, with most of these, you folks are so skilled and so experienced in most of these places. We assume you understand a lot of these things, but we're really trying to help communicate, and we hope you help us communicate, is ways that we can talk to these folks and make the programming smoother and better. And so obviously education engagement is going to be a really significant piece of that. I think we're just one of those best practices that we want to emphasize here is the fact that we need to embrace all the modern communication tools if we expect this to be regularized and to hit a recycle 60 or a recycle 40 kind of target by actually implementing best practices. And what that mostly means for folks is that the cost and the time horizon is going to be different than how programs have typically been done. You do it once and you do it on the cheap and you hope to not do it for 3 years. No, it's going to need to be more and for longer. And this isn't a big revelation, but it's very important that we finance this, and when we make the business case, that we appreciate that that has to be part and parcel of what we want to get done if we have any expectation for high performing, successful programs, and the folks who invest in this get those results. But I also want to kind of take this in a little bit different direction in terms of having people appreciate that a part of that expenditure and a part of that decision making is really, or that communication is really about talking to everybody in the decision process. There's a huge component that's internal. There's also a pretty significant component that's external. But in all of these cases, we need our outreach to be conducted in a way that says, let's do projects together. We can implement best practices. We need to do that together. And so taking that business approach, taking that approach that says, what can we all invest in, is something that we want to create a framework around and make sure that we're looking at that. But we need to recognize that collaboration might be the financial way to do it, might be the best way to be high performing. We're going to need to account for all of the machinations that will go along with making that happen. It's a cost, but it's a very important expenditure because it allows us to do so much more about implementing these programs. And so we want to just make sure that we're really, again, thinking through those. And then let's go ahead to the next slide. I'm going to talk about this again more internally. What does that mean? What does the tools help us do? Many of you know the travails of, we want to do this. We'd like to develop this program. And again, we just want to encourage that it's not just it's really across the board that you need to get communication, that you need to get understanding, that you need to get buy-in, and you need to be able to talk about things from these perspectives. And so hopefully between the accounting basis and the directional basis, you've got a way to talk about these different impacts, and again, to be able to say, here's how recycling can help those things, here's how it can be a performer, and here's how we should invest in recycling versus some other entity, because it actually is a better ROI. And so you've got that. But then next slide, please. The other part that I really want to emphasize is to implement a program, you have to vet it, which financially and programmatically implement those best practices, but you really need to be inclusive of all these folks if you want to both identify all the resources, funding, and potential supports, but also to get people to vote yes, to get people to say, this is what we want to pay for, this is what we don't want to pay for, and to have people understand that. So again, not trying to be obvious, but also saying it's not just talking to these people, but it's talking to them about what they care about and how they understand the community and how recycling can be a component of that. So go ahead, next slide. And then the last one, as we go around, supporting policies. Here again, why are we talking about these? Because these are really essential components that if we implement best practices and do a good job with them, then we know we can have high performing programs, and that's what we're advocating for. But supporting policies is a very significant piece of this for a couple of really important reasons. And first, just understand that
And this can be very simple. This can be as simple as this is the way you get your business license to drive a truck in a township, and that makes you a hauler, to an EPR system that's going to really dictate a lot about what your program might look like. And we are facing all of those decisions as communities and regions. And so in some ways, the important piece here is to understand that at the end of the day, when you go to finance a project, or you go to get accountability to a project, or otherwise try to make sure that the cost and the financing of the service is well delivered, these policies are going to be a piece of it, whether it's to get, like I said, financing, bonding, et cetera, it's to get the communities to sign off on it, et cetera. You're going to have an agreement around this. So a lot of times we want to avoid this space because it's above our pay grade, or because it's a mess, or we want to spend all our time in this space because we think it's going to solve everything. Well, I really don't think it's either one of those, but it's very important that we understand that this is going to help determine what level of effort we do and how we can perform. But the main piece here that I want to talk about is, is this point that, at the end of the day, we have a democracy, we have elected officials, we have, these systems and those folks who actually decide. And so we can be as technically competent as we want, and we can be, have a good reason to do all these things. But at the end of the day, there's really key decision makers all the way around you. But again, one of the very key ones is those elected and appointed officials. And so I'm happy to say, let's make the case around this whole value chain. But Karen, I think you've got a guest for us to talk about some of this elected officials' point of view, even more so. So thank you.
Yeah, Marty, before we do that, there was a question that came into the chat that I think, you might answer well. And it's really about, having a monopoly, or there being only one kind of collection and processing service provider, private sector service provider in your area, and how you can use the tool to maybe demonstrate or make the case for, building a Murph or a transfer station in the region.
I mean, I think the short answer around this is that you're really in vetting a system. You're really identifying what is it that the community wants, what is the community willing to pay for, and how do we get there? So that private hauler might say, well, I only want to do that. You go, well, but it's all of us that are paying that bill for that, right? And so it's really just being confident enough in having that conversation, and also reasonable enough in saying, okay, what are the challenges? Gosh, you capitalizing a new truck, you innovating is a real challenge. Maybe we're going to have to get out from underneath our public sector view and go, we need to gain share in that investment, and we need to gain share with other private entities who also want to see us have expanded collection, who want to see us recover more material to actually put more material back in. And so it's really, I think some of these questions are around how you bring those folks together. But it's not, I mean, we need to treat our partners legitimately. It's their capital, it's their piece. Now, it's also, from an elected point of view, it's your citizenry, right? And it's your service delivery, and that's okay. Again, that's why these tools are in place. They bias that, but it's because that's what the feds and the state said, this is what our folks need to participate in this system. I'm happy, and for years I've been saying, it's coming. There's a lot of people all the way around this circle who want to be involved, and are we going to be constructive in embracing that and making that work for solid services? So that's what we hope we'll do.
Right. Not vilify any private sector partner, but also identify when it makes sense for the public sector to step into a role that they haven't played before.
Yeah. I mean, again, what does it mean to be a good purchaser? It may be that people are offering what you don't want to buy. It's about, can I find people that want to join together and build in that community? And the more you have folks around that circle who say that makes sense, it's going to be for those other folks to do it, including the risk of the investment for them. Mm-hmm. And so let's create those conditions where we have really investable programs. And we think by working around these pieces and taking that approach, that's how you get there. That's how you vet it out.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Marty. Really good stuff. So we have our very own elected official guest here. Kirk Gibbs is chair of the County Board of Supervisors in Marathon County, Wisconsin, and I understand is an active member of the National Association of Counties and has been involved in a supportive advocate for recycling for a very long time. Kurt, can you put your camera on and have a discussion here?
Yes, I do have my camera on, Karen. So thank you, and thank you everyone for the opportunity to present a little bit from the elected officials' perspective. Just a little bit about myself. I was first elected to the Marathon County Board of Supervisors back in 2006. I have been reelected 8 times. We run an election every 2 years. We have the second largest county board in the United States. There's 3,069 counties in the United States, and Marathon County has the second largest. There's one county in New York that beat us out with 39 supervisors. In Marathon County, we have 38. So it's sometimes challenging. I have served as the chair of the Marathon County Board of Supervisors for at the end of this term will be 10 years, and am very thankful for that. Been active in NACO and active in the National Counties Association for the past 10 years, and also serve on the NACO Board of Directors. A little bit about Marathon County. Marathon County is pretty much right in the center of the state. If you drew a line between Green Bay and Minneapolis and stopped in the middle, you'd probably be in Marathon County. Marathon County, the biggest metropolitan area in Marathon County is Wausau and the surrounding community. The population of Marathon County is about 138,000. About 50% of that lives in the metro area. The rest of the population lives in the rural communities. Marathon County is also the largest state in the state of Wisconsin. It has 1,576 square miles in Marathon County. A little bit about Marathon County as far as its employers. The largest industry in Marathon County would be manufacturing. We have manufacturing employs a little more than 14,000 individuals. Our next major employer would be the 2 major medical facilities that we have. And they employ just under 12,000 employees. The agriculture would be there also. But as far as number of bodies employed, that continues to decrease as the size of the operations continue, the size of the farms continue to go up. One of the things that I was asked to actually give a little bit of perspective on was, how does an issue come to the forefront and be brought to a body in decision making. Marathon County does have a solid waste facility. We do some recycling. And am a very strong opponent for supporting recycling, because the biggest thing that a lot of, and you people know this very well, is there is a cost to taking what was recyclables and continually putting those in to solid waste facilities. There's not only the maintenance cost and the building cost of the facility, but there's also the maintenance and long-term cost of maintaining that facility. So the more that we can divert, the more we can recycle, the better off the county is, and the better off the community is long-term. So one of the questions was, how do you get to decision makers? I think you need to make the point of how the value there is and what the value there is to the recycling or any issue, whatever that issue is, and how it gets to In Marathon County, it's kind of unique. And Marathon County in the state of Wisconsin has large boards, but in the county itself, again, has a 38-member board. It is unlike a lot of other counties that you may deal with or governmental entities where you have a smaller group of individuals making decisions. In Marathon County or in the state of Wisconsin, it's done, the policymakers are the board. They do not normally get into operations, but we do everything at a committee level. So in this case, our Environmental Resources Committee is the oversight committee for anything that has to do with our solid waste facility. And so the way that you bring an item that gets to their attention is it needs to, impact people. And I think our motto is Marathon County wants to be the healthiest, safest, and most prosperous. In order to do that, one of the things that we look at is how does something affect the citizens of Marathon County? And so when that case is made, and when the case is made that not recycling costs the taxpayers money also, clearly is how an item eventually gets brought to the full board is it goes through the committee structure. So the committee makes the recommendation that we do recycling or what level of recycling. And then that is decided at the committee level, and then it's brought forward, and the board then allocates the resources necessary to do the level of recycling, or in this case, recycling. And then the full board will vote on it. But again, and then it's handed out to the experts in the field to implement. Again, I always explain how county government works this way, in that we decide that an example would be, we decide that that we want the administration or we want to go to the moon. We don't build the rocket ship. We don't even design the rocket ship. We just pay for the rocket ship. Once it's been decided that we're going to go to the moon, how to get there is up to the experts in the field. So one of the things that I tell people, when you have a discussion about an item or something that's affecting the citizens, and you are trying to convince them of what is potentially in their best interest, is be as truthful and forthcoming as you can. And if there's a cost, and there's a cost to the county has to recognize that cost is there, but it's there regardless of what they do, whether they do recycling or not. So I would leave it up to anybody, that I would open it up to any questions that anybody has for me. But again, I want to thank you for the opportunity, because I clearly believe that the more that we continue to move in this direction, the better off the community will be, the better off the county and the citizens also, because they're demanding it.
Kurt, really great stuff. Thank you for sharing that. Your point about the fact that you really make decisions about money, are we going to spend this money? Are we going to pay for that? I think is exactly what we're trying to demonstrate here with the tools that we're providing. Here's how you can get a general kind of cost for what you're talking about and how you're delivering those services. And having that kind of open discussion with the board is really what it's going to take for you guys to have the important discussions you need and ask those questions.
You're 100% correct. I mean, the questions are operationally, where's those costs, and how is it going to impact the budgets, of the solid waste department, and are we going to use those resources here? Are we going to use those resources over there? But those tools are just an excellent tool to be able to utilize and put in the specific information that's pertinent to the unit of government that you're dealing with.
That's great. And I think Marty Seaman wants to make a point or ask a question.
Sure.
Hi, Kurt. Thank you so much for participating today. I wanted to kind of get your take on what I have struggled with for years, which is this notion of where does recycling fit in all the other very important priorities that you folks have. And it's a joke that I always say, we're number 7, because various studies have shown that when municipalities and counties get together, they say all their key priorities. And sometimes we get to 3 or 5, but the joke is kind of over time, there's a lot of other items and we're an important one. As you said, it's something that matters to you, but there's all these other ones as well. And so as we work around that value chain, I mean, how best to approach that, do you think, in terms of, we think our stuff's real important, right? I know you have a lot on your plate.
You're absolutely correct, and I guess the thing that I would emphasize is how it impacts the quality of life, because ultimately it does have an impact on the quality of life for residents, because that's what elected officials listen to. They listen to obviously the electorate when it comes election time, but they also listen to the electorate when they have concerns about how are we taking care of the environment. I think that is coming to the forefront more so in recent times, and I think it will continue to as we see the impacts of global change.
That's really helpful. We have a question from one of our guests here. That is, where do your environmental committee members come from?
So how the Environmental Resources Committee is comprised, it's comprised of elected officials. They're appointed during the organizational period. Now, in Marathon County, they come from multiple backgrounds. We have some that have farm background. We have some that are from municipalities, from the metro area. And then we also have 2, one that represents the Towns Association. So the Township Association has representation on our committee, as does the Ag Farm Services Agency representative. So it's diverse. We have a fairly large committee of 9 people. And again, but it's a diverse committee with ag, in some cases rural, non-ag, but also metropolitan is how it's comprised. And I would guess that that's probably different for every community or every county. In our county, again, we looked at, or when I make the appointments, I want to make that committee as diverse as possible, so that it's not just one focus and one background that's bringing their expertise or their experiences to the table.
So it sounds a little bit unique in your situation with the size of the board you have. Those board members serve on these committees, so you really have elected officials, making those decisions and reaching out to community members and their, professional staffs, whoever, to provide them input on those decisions to bring to the board. Got it.
Absolutely.
Real helpful.
Absolutely.
How about helping us, identify or avoid pitfalls when we're talking about, making potentially significant changes to systems and services that exist?
I guess whenever I've had discussions, and something that has really always challenged me, in probably not a positive way, is when somebody overpromises and underdelivers. That literally, is really problematic, and it will turn off an elected official very quickly, and it becomes very problematic to try to get that individual back to the table to have actual discussion. So that would be probably the biggest pitfall that I would ever recommend as far as discussion. When you're having discussions is, as much information, because the more information, I've always advocated, the more information one has, the more and better the decision that can be resulting. But again, one of the challenges that I run into is when somebody overpromises and underdelivers.
Yeah, excellent. You talked at the very beginning about, the value of, and I'll put in my own words, but, decreasing the risk on the community of, landfilling or disposing of all of its waste. And that's, one of the very first problems that we deal with. But I also know, I believe you have a mill and manufacturers in your county that benefit from the recyclables you produce. Is that economic argument, does that carry weight in your community?
I honestly believe that it does, because you're absolutely right. We have several paper mills. One paper mill in particular does a fair amount of recycling and utilizing recycling materials. So there is value. I mean, when you talk about manufacturing has a significant value in the economics and employment. One of the higher paid, skills or semi-skilled labor, and so you're absolutely right. Understanding the real challenge right now in the current labor market is finding laborers. But you're absolutely right that the value that is added here in this case in manufacturing is second to none in the county.
Oh, that's really great to hear. And I feel like the list of that allows us to advocate for recycling is only growing. How much are you and your board talking about climate change and mitigating the impacts of climate change, and maybe how that relates to recycling?
Because the board turned, I mean, I would say, I've had history on the board now. Like I said, I've been on the board. At the end of this term will be 18 years. And so I've seen that evolve. And the board had a significant turnover over one issue last term. In fact, in this past April, there was a significant turnover on the board. We're nonpartisan. We're supposed to be nonpartisan. However, there was a issue that was brought forward by one of the parties locally, and it had a significant impact on the retention of members. So we had a 17 board member turnover, and it's been very significant. So at this point, I would say that climate change was important, and much more important than it currently is under the current board, and that's unfortunate, because everyone, I think, everybody has to recognize that the impacts of global warming is real, and anybody that wants to pretend that it doesn't, all they have to do is look outside.
So it remains a bit of a contentious issue.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And like I said, and it's political in nature to some people. And so because of that, because of the significant turnover that we had in the board, it became even more challenging to address.
That's great. I'll ask if there are any other questions for Kurt now, and you know, as we wait, you know, Kurt, if I can ask, what caused the significant turnover?
It stemmed from an issue, a resolution on equity, inclusion, and it stemmed from that. And one party wanted to politicize that, and did so, and made it very political, and that drove. We had we normally have about 7 people turn over on the board because we have a large board, and we had a fairly aged board on Marathon County. But this last term we had, besides the 7 that chose not to rerun, which would be normal, there was also, I think there was 13 contested races, and a lot of those contested races all were in support of a resolution that supported equity and inclusion.
Another good reminder to be fully aware of the politics in your community, and really, you know, anchor your proposals in good service provision to the benefit of the community, that hopefully, you know, saves money and provides good services.
Absolutely, absolutely, Karen.
Yeah. Thank you, Kurt, so much. I really
Absolutely.
appreciate you talking with us today. Please hang around. We've got some polls next, I believe.
Sure. Thank you.
You know, yeah, okay, we'll go right to the polls. Go ahead. I think we need some direction from Emrad.
I'm jumping in here. Okay, folks, so we are going to ask you to join us on the Poll Everywhere software. Easy to get to. You can open up another browser window if you're on your computer and go to pollev.com/recycle123. No spaces, it's all smushed together. If you go on there, put in that URL, you'll be brought to our poll location. And then as I turn on each of these questions, you'll be able to enter your answers there. Or you can text us. If you are text savvy, you can text the message recycle123, again, all one word smushed together, to what would be the phone number of 37607. That will then again put you into our poll system. And as I open up the questions, it will appear on your phone and you'll be able to participate. So again, either open up a browser window, put in that URL, the pollev.com/recycle123, or text recycle123 to the phone number 37607. Either way will get you into our poll system. I will give you just another 20 seconds for folks to see that on the screen before we're going to go to our first poll. All right. At this point, I'm going to open up to the first poll. The question, and again, if you forget the instructions, they're up at the top there on how to log into the polling system, either via browser or text. Question being, do you think collaboration on market development is a key issue for Region 5 states, for our region here? And it looks like we're having a few answers coming in. Yes is very prominent. Maybe is in the race. We also have the other options of no, or you're just not sure. I'll give this another few seconds. And Karen, I don't know if you have any comments or commentary you want to jump in on. Please feel free while we look to see the results falling in.
Yeah, and you know, I guess keep in mind that market development really is more than just assuring end markets for these and end users for this material, but it's the assurance that we can supply that material to those end markets, assuring that there is a whole system that's aligned to move recyclables into productive use.
All right, it looks like mainly, yes, people feel that it is a key issue, or at least one of the key issues for our region, followed by the maybes. It doesn't look like anybody is opposed to it. So we're definitely seeing that. I'm going to go ahead and go to our next question. And this one's a short answer response. So you can just type in, a small phrase or, a few words. But what type of market development support or programming is needed in your state or region or area? If there's certain type, everything. Composting. And you'll see as your answers come in, they're going to fill in like a news feed here.
Excellent answers. Organics, C&D, getting local materials into markets. Reducing contamination, really upping our game in terms of education. Funding is coming, at least that's what we're told. Glass continues to be an issue for people. Yes, excellent.
All right. I'll let it go.
I'm a little bit, just a minute, how are you dealing with multifamily recycling? How are you dealing with, your cities that aren't really providing services yet or relying specifically on what private sector haulers are providing? And what kind of support do you think you need for those issues? Or how do we help you improve programs? Well, if there's nothing to add, we could probably go to the next.
Okay. Let me jump to the next one here. Okay, now this one, if you look at the 3 different options here, you can select 1 or 2 or all if you'd like as you're entering in. But it's looking at, would you support continued collaboration around making the case for recycling, which is what we're talking about today, the tools and the making the case, the argument for this type of programs. Option B is collaboration around other regional circular economy projects. And option C being ongoing regional discussion to support developing opportunities and needs.
Which is now winning out, which is really great because there used to be a group called MACRO, Mid-Atlantic Recycling Organization, something like that. But it was a really an organization for Region 5 state agencies to talk to one another, and that they don't really meet anymore. But we think that kind of reviving that group, but including state recycling organizations, economic developers, and kind of others that can help, develop big ideas around how we in this region better coordinate and work together to develop markets and recycling systems here. So I'm really excited to see that, you all would like to see more discussion around that. I think that bodes well for kind of the future of this work. That's great.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for participating in our polls. And Karen, I'm going to turn it back over to you fully. I think we are at the end. We're wrapping up here and opening it up to any other questions that may have trickled in while we were doing our polls.
That's great. Thank you to all the speakers today. This is really good stuff. RRS for developing these tools and for kind of keeping this effort to help all of our municipalities step up to really good best practices, systems and services is really important. And thanks to EPA Region 5 and Chris Newman, who said MACRA is really the Mid-America Council of Recycling Officials. So thanks for that correction. But it really does take all of us to build a good system. And we are really working now, and hopefully we'll have the support in the future to work more closely to coordinate efforts, to share resources, to maybe collaborate on something much bigger than we've ever done before. So with that, I'll invite Marty Seaman, if he has any last words for the group, to say his piece.
You know, I would just only reiterate, I was struggling to turn on my camera. I just want to reiterate how much I appreciate people spending the time to do this and the feedback we've received up to this point, people's willingness to share information so that we can include that in the compendium of the project, and people's interest in continue to go forward. It's really important. It's really fun to work with folks. And so I just really big thank you to everyone for the time they spent today. And I hope they feel like it was worth it.
Yeah, I agree. I have always felt like the kind of recycling world is one where we share and help each other. So please don't hesitate to reach out, and we'll connect you with whoever we think we need to connect you with to get you the answers you need. Again, thanks to Kurt Gibbs for giving us his time. Really understanding the perspective of our local officials is where it's at as we really begin to transition our systems from disposal oriented to productive materials management oriented. And we'll be back in touch when we have more to offer and can engage you in a new way. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. Have a great weekend.